No filler. R.I.P. John Trimble. Today on Trekland Tuesdays Live, number 348. Coming to you here from the heart of Trekland through Portal 47 and Trekland Treks, right? Your customized away mission here in Southern California to an actual Star Trek location site. Just coming to you for some sanity, clarity, and the big picture, or a bigger picture in all of Star Trek today. Hey, everybody. If you are watching us later, not live, that's great. You can leave a comment below because some of the ones the last 2 or 3 weeks have really taken off. I invite everybody to go back and look and see what people are saying about TTLs and even our second opinions. But if you are watching later right now, try to join us some Tuesday. It would be great to have you with us. So yes, gang o' mine, here we are. It's another Tuesday. Stuff is happening. Discovery is unrolling. And it seems like there's enough in the week. Unfortunately, not everything happens on Monday and Tuesday morning. And events happen during the week that I don't get a chance to react to. So I wanted to say, take a moment, number one, to talk about the person we lost last week, last Friday. And I did do a separate comment on this, but I wanted to have it enshrined in TTL too, talking about John Trimble. Bijo Trimble's husband. Now, several things come to mind. Number one, I've always made it a point when I've been with them, and over the years, just meeting them at cons, saying hi, having a brief word, or being fellow guests. I remember, I think one of the coolest times was when we were all guests at a small convention in an old school, grew out of being a lit con called Condor. So you can always tell the old school conventions, fan conventions, nonprofits, because the procedure was to always have con in your name and try to be clever. So Condor was the old school San Diego convention. It was probably never more than 500, 1,000 at most. And it wasn't meant to be big, huge, you know, we had a guest or two from different genres. Wasn't trying to emulate Comic-Con. It wasn't even trying to emulate a Trek Vegas because they were budget and they were fans and yada, yada. And in the 50th year, I was thrilled because Janet and I were the guests along with the Goes, along with Dorothy and Denny, Dorothy Fontana and her husband, Denny Skotek, and John and Bijo. And it was really cool because, like, I got to sit down and talk with them. I hadn't really talked to Dorothy that much up until then. I bits and pieces on the run, but to sit down and have long conversations and a couple of long interviews, it was a chance to sit down and talk with Bijo and John. But what I always am very mindful to do is, yes, John and Bijo's initial huge claim to fame is that they wound up leading the mail campaign, the original Save Star Trek campaign. And if you go back, and we've got episodes from the Trek Files, I was so glad we got these on tape, digital tape, talking about that story. But of course, it's been out there. It's been written about for ages. The more the years go by, the more you can get into wrinkles of the story. And yes, eventually we know that Gene did put up some of the money for it himself, although he denied it to NBC at the time. Gene, call off the dogs. They're drowning us. I got nothing. Sorry, guys. Well, he at least initiated the tap. Once it was off and running, though, it was a beast of its own, right? We had them talking. And then they helped found Star Trek Enterprises, which was, if it flats, we'll sell it and mail it. Gene and Majel's original take to satisfy fan cravings, because as you've seen in our letters on the Trek Files, people were constantly writing, not just for photos, but they wanted phasers and they wanted tribbles and they wanted a console. I mean, it was just so new to people. That kind of thing on a mass scale, that sci-fi could be more than just your favorite book and everything on screen was just trash. And once a decade, you got something cool on screen. Forbidden Planet, Day the Earth Stood Still. And even if it was on the small screen, it was a one-off. Or in the case of Twilight Zone, it was anthology. So it's just so hard to imagine the hunger in the 60s for Star Trek. Just the way it's hard to imagine how the whole world stopped, dropped everything to go watch a NASA launch, a Mercury, Gemini, or Apollo launch. It's just a different world now, but you got to put yourself into that headspace and remember why things were new and how when something is new today, how it's, you know, the GOAT all of a sudden. But that was the situation that first John and Bijo were swept up in, and then led the campaign. And because of the notoriety from that, wound up helping Gene and Majel set up Star Trek Enterprises, which turned to Lincoln Enterprises, which then, by Rod's generation, became roddenberry.com. And also the times when they weren't so close to Gene, and when so much stuff that saved the show and sparked the fandom became so big that as the 70s wore on and a movie or some kind of a comeback was certain, all of a sudden Gene did okay, hold on, wait a minute. Franz Joseph, Schnabel, the Trimbles. I mean, so many folks who had a hand in that early 70s survival revival fandom, Gene started to put at arm's length because he had to make sure that nobody else had a stake in what was going to happen here the second time around. For one thing, he was not near starving, but he was scrambling. He was looking out for himself, and I get that. But eventually, the Trimbles were dethroned, at least as far as official Trek fandom. Now, they were always there because they'd been through too much, and too much was owed to them. And over the years, people don't realize that John and Bijo, and I know I'm lumping them together, I'm doing exactly what I said I didn't want to do. John and Bijo were actually in the SCA first. Before they found, about the same year they found Star Trek in the fall, they had just joined SCA, which is the Society for Creative Anachronism. It's the medieval reenactors, and sometimes you might see them, but I'm not talking about your generic Ren Fair performers. I'm talking about the role play. You're a member, you get a persona, you come up with a whole backstory for your character. It's a little bit like the most obsessed STO players, or in the old days, the most obsessed Starfleet International role players with a backstory and all of that. But this was the SCA. It was first before it hit sci-fi. And a lot of people lived their SCA life. They never stopped dressing medieval. They never stopped using their persona name. I knew people that I never knew their actual names because they just went by their SCA names. The whole country is divided up into, okay, you can look up the SCA on your own. The whole country of the U.S., maybe the world by now, but the U.S. is divided up into kingdoms. Oklahoma was Onsteora. You had shires. You had incipient shires, which would be like a shuttle becoming a ship chapter in Starfleet. Incipient shires became shires, and eventually maybe a kingdom would break off of it. Anyway, that was actually John and Bijo's first. And then later on, Bijo totally got into, they were always crafty, and Bijo got into dyes and all that. But look, John was an Air Force veteran, Korean War Air Force veteran. And I want to say that because there's all that aspect to his life. But it was the time when everybody got drafted, and that's what he did. He was a North Dakota native, wound up being based and serving all over the place. But it was a Forey Ackerman party. And if you don't know Forrest J. Ackerman, was like the fan's fan. You talk about a professional fan in the Acker Mansion, which I'm so mad. We were in LA long enough with a 2 or 3 year overlap. I did not get myself over to see his insane memorabilia stuffed house. But when in the day when he gave his parties, that's how John, it was for fans, for pros, the LA crowd scene. And before the Star Trek boom, much less the Star Wars and everything else boom. And that is how John and Bijo, famously, the family story is that they met under the piano at Forey Ackerman's Acker Mansion. That's where they met. But then were married 64 years ago. So figure it in your years. 64 years married, 3 children, Katha, Laura, and Jen. Laura is the one who's been kind of the family spokesman and posted the obituary for her dad that had a lot of this information. In fact, John was on the board for the SCA twice, 2 different terms. And that's when Star Trek came along, and they totally just did it as fans when they heard that it was on the bubble. And that's the first season bubble, when they had the committee, which was mainly out of the sci-fi writers looking out for having a decent sci-fi show on TV and having a market to sell to. It really wasn't as massive, and it was a rumored bubble. And of course, we had the second season. The main campaign that the Trimbles led, the Save Star Trek campaign that prompted the on-air announcement. Okay, basically it was the polite way of saying, stop your writing. It's back, it's back. That was second season going into third. That was where it all started. Now, later on, they cycled back to SCA. Later on, they left LA, went to Texas for a while as they aged, looking for retirement places, came back, were close to the family. The last few years, John, by his veteran status, had been down in the California Veterans Home, right on the Mexican border at Chula Vista. And that's where the hospice was. Just a couple of days before he passed, they had announced that he was going into hospice, and everybody would really appreciate letters. I just want to say, number one, I'm taking time today, even though the hullabaloo was on Friday when he passed, and a lot of people paid their respects. A lot of people gave wonderful thoughts and memories, and it's Tuesday because this is my normal platform day, even though I wanted to jump in and say something on Friday on Instagram, especially, and carryover. But on the days when I would see John, it was great to see John and Bijo together, because a lot of fans know that later on Bijo took up the gauntlet of the concordance from Dorothy Jones Height, who actually started it, but she finished it and then kept it updated and then took it into the pro editions that it had later. And just ongoingly did so much, kept a newsletter up for years. And there's a danger, there's a time, they would never say this and they would never push this, but fandom out here looking in, and she had that cool name, tends to remember, I want to say, Bijo more than John. And I want to make sure and remember that they were a couple, that they supported each other. They co-led the mail campaign, and they co-founded Star Trek Enterprises, the first Star Trek that kind of showed the way. And retail merch, even though it was Gene and Magel's company, that other people privately said, oh my God, this could be an industry. This could be a side hustle in today's terms. And then John, of course, was there all the way through, not quite as publicly and a little more quiet than Bijo, although he could sound off when he wanted to. And so I'm going to urge everyone, if you want to know, they're both the guests, but toward the end of our second season, I want to say, I just was looking at this, episodes 22 and 24, especially 24 is John and Bijo, second season 2.224. John and Bijo came over and we recorded them live and took pictures, talked about the mail campaign. We had the documents, of course, being Trek files. We had the flyers and all that. We also talked about the Star Trek Enterprises catalog. We also talked about when they got crossways with Gene, or when Gene got crossways with them. They parted ways, and he had someone else running the company after that. And they went on. It was a shakeup. They had enjoyed so much access and so much closeness, but it never really went away. And of course, they went on to run conventions in LA, the EchoCon and film cons, and still had a working relationship with Gene. Wasn't a shutdown coldness at all. What's been great is, as the generations went by and fandom, in the aughts, I don't want to say forgot about the Trimbles, but things moved on. The Berman era blossomed. Boom. They weren't so tied to that. They were supposed to be in the beginning. There's some first season stories from Next Gen that are cute. And basically, I met Bijo for the first time when she came up to meet me after the TNG Companion had been published. And my first time in LA at the old Grand Slam, which used to be pre-Vegas, was the Creation's preeminent Star Trek convention, the big one, because it was in LA and everybody could come over there in Pasadena at the Civic. And I met her, and it was a thrill to meet Bijo. Oh my God. But at the same time, I had been around the block enough already to realize that I think she felt a little miffed and a little displaced. It was her role to do the concordances. And I remember something that the late, great Richard Arnold told me, and others had told me, that she was getting scripts and was supposed to be doing a concordance and just hadn't. And things moved on. And despite that, she came over to check me out, say hello. And I say this, here I'm talking about Bijo. John was right there with her. And it was a pleasure to meet them both and to make sure that as the years went by, I stayed in touch, paid respects, and also eventually started trying to download those stories. And others, of course, were too. And then as the years really started to go by, making sure that just our fandom knew who they were. And then as it seemed to be easier to know who Bijo was, to remember John as well. And I guess the last time we talked was at the Picard season 3 premiere, the hoo-ha, at Grauman's Chinese. I always say Grauman's, that was the original. Yeah, at the Chinese theater. And I thought, well, how nice that they'd been brought up. Then I found out later on that a fan had gone down and brought the 4 hours, brought them back up for that evening, which was wonderful. And just seeing them over the years. And of course, Bijo's still with us, and I hope she can get out to some things. It may be a case of people need to go to her now, so I don't know how her travel plans are going to be. But I'm just really, really gratified and thrilled that not only just knowing them over the years, but that we started getting them archived for fandom consumption later, because that's the way things work. So yes, R.I.P. John Trimble. And as I said in my Instagram, look, crew, they famously helped get Star Trek to a 3rd season, so that it didn't quite get to 100 episodes, but it got close enough for the syndication package to sell, to become a thing, to revolutionize what happened with local stations and their local ratings, to revolutionize what syndication could be, and much less revolutionize in the mundane world's eyes that sci-fi could be handled well. And if you did it right, you would tickle so many imaginations and fancies, you would have them shut up and giving you my money up and down the line. And that is what helped George Lucas get the last little bit of his funding after the 73, 74, 75 conventions, after Franz Joseph Schnabel's Tech Manual was on the bestseller list, New York Times #1 for 16 weeks. And the news, you could make fun of those Trekkie kids, but they're plunking down bucks. And it wasn't much bucks in the early days, not compared to today. We laugh at those prices. But the point was, it was moving the counter. And you couldn't argue with the local station. Between those 3 things, my theory is the purse strings opened up enough, and George Lucas realized maybe it's the time to make this. And not only did he want to do it, but somebody else put faith in him to give the money. And he credited the one time he and Gene Roddenberry met on stage at the first official Star Wars convention there, that my friend Dan Madsen helped organize in the 80s, that George Lucas was able to thank them. So just think about that. I love to talk about dominoes. We don't know the way the butterfly effect is going to go. But if they hadn't decided to take on that mail campaign, and we never had Star Trek, the media revolution of sci-fi might not have happened, and including the dominoes that fell from Star Trek. Maybe something else eventually, those urges would have found their way to a screen. It feels likely they would have, but certainly the domino effect that we have today. And Star Wars conventions wouldn't have been a thing that led to the Comic-Con style. Who knows? Who knows? And the history of Hollywood films and TV with the Marvel DC superhero world that ignited this, much less the sci-fi. Who knows? But I'm just going to say that don't just chalk up John's influence there to, and of course the SCA we know in that world, the medieval, the fantasy world, the medieval recreationist world led to the fantasy adjacent, and they were all, most of them were big Tolkien fans, and we had the fantasy revolution. So yes, that's why I take a moment to stop and pay homage to John Trimble. And Bijo's still with us, and I look forward to hopefully, having her around to enjoy her and her stories and her input for a good time to come. And I know Laura, looking out for the family, is doing the same. Now, one thing we didn't know last week, and I want to make sure and put this up, is that since now Laura has announced, if you want to do a memorial gift in John's name, they have listed 3 memorial contribution places. One is Via Esperanza, which helps with intellectually and emotionally developmentally kids. That's one. One is the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, or donate to your local AIDS office. And yes, that is still a thing. You'd better believe it. And number 3, donate to your local no-kill shelter, animal shelter. Those are the family's wishes. Also said that donating blood or platelets in his name would work. I'm just getting off their Facebook page. Laura has been posting at their John and Bijo Trimble page. You can get that too. All the links are there. So that's good to hear. That's a celebration of life. No word yet on any kind of public celebration, although I'm sure across fandom over the next year, such as at Star Trek Vegas, other places, there'll be moments to remember John by. All right? Yes, I promised you not a filler episode. I'm going to say this real quickly. This whole thing about filler episodes blew up this week. Maybe I should have saved this for a separate topic. But I could very easily, quickly see it wasn't like a killer debate, but it sure got people interested to talking. Some of it was, since it came from an interview with Alex, some of the just anti-Kurtzman people weighed in to blow it up. But I could tell there was a lot of sincere confusion or maybe misinformation about. And he used the word. That's what kicked this off. But I can see fans taking that word to mean different things. Now, I think what Alex meant was he was talking and trying to justify the worth in a very tight 10, 15, 13, 12, and 10 episode season of a serialized arc. There is room for that. A lot of us miss the other. There's also the idea that what was ginned up in 2017 may have evolved in Star Trek. Serialized storytelling been around for a long time, but not through the Star Trek filter, not through an established franchise genre IP. I think that was the double-edged sword. That was the hurdle. And I think as the years have gone by and we've seen the other series tackle that, especially Picard. Now we'll see what happens with Starfleet Academy. We'll see if Section 31 gets picked up beyond its movie. You know, Michelle Yolis. I think the quality, the feel for how to do that has evolved big time. Just even over Discovery. This season, there's nuance there and standalonedness that you'd never get, with one exception in the first season, Discovery. Of course, Discovery was a train wreck because of its labored birth, and it was just dealing with what it had to deal with, not so much the last 2 or 3 seasons. And critiques Discovery all you want, and people always will, but you can tell that the writing has evolved since then. That's what he meant by filler. He meant not having a standalone amidst, not having a bada bing, bada bang amidst your Dominion War. Is basically what we're saying here. But a lot of people took it to mean filler as in crappy episodes because you were trying to crank out 26 in a year. And I mentioned the writers themselves, the TNG folks. Look, read The Companion. Aquiel became one of those. There's just episodes that they have high hopes. Nobody intentionally makes a bad movie or sets out to make a bad episode. But sometimes the factors are against you, especially when you're talking about episodes in a season, especially when you're talking about an old school normal season. I used to call them the clinkers, but just the ones that just got spit out. Time ran out on the writing process. It was exhaustion. Nobody got a 7th inning stretch. And you see that. Masks is another one. Maybe a great idea, another Joe Menosky idea that just could not get contained in a 60, 70 page script. So those are what I always call clinkers, but I think some people were calling them fillers. They were taking some of Alex's cues there, saying if you had a long, full season, you're bound to have some that aren't as satisfactory. I think that's where some people, and I think some people even went to calling a filler show a bottle show. Bottle shows were just meant to not have a lot of guest stars and or sets to build, much less visual effects in the old days. And those are in other words, stick with your costs that are already amortized. Use your regular cast, use your regular sets and your stock footage if you can. Do as much as you could without spending more and just have a cheap episode. I'm not saying a clip show. Just a cheaper. I mean, famously, some of the bottle shows have been the moments where some of the best character work has happened. People love to cite the Drumhead on TNG as a wonderful bottle show. And that's true. And people were criticizing Alex for there's nothing wrong with what they meant to say a bottle show. A filler show is to go back to the basics, take a breather, and have character work. Much less have on the X-Files, they would have been called the non-mythos shows. Have one that doesn't fit into the arc. And those are fine too, because that's where we get character. All of it's true as long as it's a decent episode, decently written, and not a clinker. But by and large, a lot of the discussion, and maybe debate at times, but the discussion, I just thought suffered from people all coming in with their own definition. They all decided what a filler show must be. And I feel like they were talking about at least 3 different ones. Now, that didn't stop the conversation from foaming up, and that's fine. That's great. And it stayed civil in most quarters. Some of the old school just hate vitriol and broad brush, and let's just jump to the most extreme adjectives we can. There's no moderation. There's no room for, this is my opinion, what's yours. The people that just lay down the law because they don't have time to use another couple of mitigating adjectives and nouns of address. And, you know, that's what it is. That's what it is. But that was just a point I wanted to say. I didn't do a special about this, but I just want to say, everybody have your opinions. But I just think we were all on scattered. Nobody was in the same terms. Define your terms before you can have a discussion. I just think that was, I just wanted to say that, get that out there, even if it is sharing space with our remembrance of John Trimble today. It was another aspect of last week, post Tuesday. In fact, I think it dropped the very next day, that I just wanted to be on the record about. All right. Okay, that's going to do it. Wow. Bing, bang, bong. Bingo, bango, bongo. I would be remiss if I didn't, yes, thank all of our Patreon folk, our TTL clubbers, as I call them. Diana Hopkins, Robin Wilson, Lawrence Todd, Joshua Patton, Justin Porteous, Glenda Bruton, Chris Jiggins, Pranakasha Productions, Comedy Forecast, and Andrew Jazemski, and our live wires, Robert McLean, Byron Bailey, G.R. Poole, Habib Gunjonson, Alan Hoenzi, Dave Gregory, Tobias Rex, Donna S. Runyon, Greg Wickstrom, and Kay Zushevsky. Thank you so much, one and all, one and all. The divider there is, and it's just so simple, the divider is a $5 and a $10 Patreon level. I kept it simple on purpose. So would you share the program if you enjoy, if you think you know a background or Star Trek person who enjoys some sanity, clarity, and a bigger picture, the way that we do it in Trekland. I like to think it's kind of unique here. We have so many great pundits and commentators and authorities in Star Trek who overlap, but I'd still like to say that no one quite goes to some of the places I do and has a perspective that Dr. Trek does. So I appreciate sharing, and I appreciate everybody else who supports it. I even think the YouTube channel's picking up some folks lately, between Second Opinion and the replays of this show. Some spirited discussion in there, and some old school fans coming over to knock me because I dared say the D word. Still, but there we go. $5 and $10, patreon.com/Trekland Live. I really appreciate it. It's the getting close to the end of the month, so it's jumping in if you'd like to jump in with us. It's a shout out every week. I keep it simple. The live wires, the $10 level, get access to some early generation behind the scenes creatives interviews from the first years of Portal 47. And I do appreciate that a ton. Hey, this is, did I skip it? I skipped it. My Trek Files here. This is Tuesday, normally a day for a new Trek Files. Guess what? We just went on hiatus, which means if you didn't catch the season finale last week, you missed a great one. We're closing out our anniversary celebration, the 40th anniversary, 50th, for the animated series with none other than one of the writers for the animated series, a guy you know as Walter Koenig, Mr. Chekhov himself. Yeah, Bester on Babylon 5. It was great to have Walter on the Trek Files talking about his pitch for the 50-foot Spock. Yeah, that was his idea. You want to hear the whole thing. It's our finale. And you know what? While you're there, they're only 15, 20 minutes. You can back catalog 11 seasons. 11 times 24. Quick. Figure it in your years. Would love to have you check that out. And we'll be back in 4, 5, 6 weeks with season 12. So stay tuned for that word. All right. Meanwhile, yeah, it's portal47.net. That's where you can get your backstage mini-con all year long, every month. I'm so glad to have the Portales. Tomorrow night, our guest is Michael Westmore Jr. for makeup, special effects, electronics, and also just editing. Yeah, Michael Jr. still leans into his makeup effects, Borg blinkies, data blinkies, those pioneering days. But he was an editor too, trained as an editor, and worked on the last few seasons of the Star Treks. That's portal47.net, but you can follow me on X, still Twitter X, Larry Nemecek. Please, if you haven't already and you're watching us on YouTube, like and subscribe on YouTube. Share it, ring the bell, do all the things so you don't miss one. Instagram yourself also. And sure, Facebook, why not? It's still there. Love it if you could all jump over and spread the word on YouTube, because that's where the numbers are. the important numbers are. If you're with us later and you're leaving, please, there's little rumbles out there about, just make sure you've had all your shots. Don't waste it all on your cat and your dog and your other pets. Take care of yourself too, would you? Do all the things. Stay healthy, and yeah, stay woke. Check the sources is what I mean, right? Weed out the disinfo or the misinfo. There's a lot of it out there, and a lot of it's going to get thicker. And if you realize something shocking about history, check the sources. It might be disinfo, but it might be the stuff no one ever told you. There's so much history that has not been shared with us because it was meant to keep someone or some group down. And I mean that up and down the board. That's all what I mean when I say stay woke. Don't go to sleep on history. I guess I'm still saying, as always, trek well.